do all things in a manner that pleases you. We love you and your Son. It's through his name that we pray. Amen.
Sing the wonders of our Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mountains bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a blessing. When we all get to heaven, what day of rejoicing and rejoicing. When we all see we'll sing and shout his praise. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a traveler's on us. When we all get to heaven, what day of rejoicing and rejoicing, when we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout with praise. Let us then be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one glimpse of him in glory will our toils not when we all get to heaven. What a day of rejoicing and rejoicing when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory.
Good morning. We are 39 days away from Last to Leaders. 39. Inside of 40. It is coming up very quickly. A few quick announcements. This morning, our young ladies will be leading the ladies' class downstairs. If you would like to participate and have not already gotten with me, please let me know. We'll make sure that you are on the list. No puppet practice this week. We have a lot of folks out of town, so none of our 4 puppet teams will practice. Lastly, please make a point to be back here tonight at 5 p.m. for worship, 4 p.m. if you are a young man who is practicing for Lads to Leaders. Our young ladies will not meet today at 4. I also have a message for our middle and high school boys from Devon, Brianna's Devon. He has encouraged that all middle and high school boys participate in worship service this evening. So you don't want to disappoint him, so please make a point to do that. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. Thanks for being here this morning. If you're online, well, actually, I just got a text from somebody saying the feed went down. So anyway, that's not happening. Want to thank Chris and for the message he gave us. Oh, you got it back up? Good. Okay. Chris, one thing I have to clear up. Chris said if you were here at 9:20, you got it. No, I was here at 9:15. I got a call from Chris at 9:14, so it wasn't 9:20. And you may have noticed that I was the only one up here this morning. That's because Andy went to visit his daughter in South Georgia, and Lou and Andy, Ken, are sick, which just leaves me here today, and I almost died. So you ain't got much. you're on one, we're on our last legs here today, so hang on. So anyway, thanks for being here. We want to welcome back Mike and Jennifer and Megan. Want to mention them this morning. Thanks for coming back to be with us. Hopefully you're here forever now. And any of our visitors, please come and talk to us. Got a lot of people traveling. See, it's kind of a thin crowd, but school's out, so everybody's on the road. Keep them in your prayers, and all our sick and those that have been healed. Also remember Walk to Water. I'm supposed to mention in the progressive meeting later this month. Will you go to God in prayer with me? Dear Lord, we want to thank you again today for everything you give us. We want to ask that you forgive us of all the sins that we commit and help us to be better Christians and be more like you and your Son as we go through our lives. Be with all those that are on the road traveling, keep them safe, and help them make sure they come back to us safely. Be with our many sick. We've got many sick among us that need your healing hands and your touch. Be with their families as they go through tough times with you. And we want to thank you for the healing that you have given to all of us that were in your need. We want to thank you for your Son and the sacrifice that he made. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
Mom. Hey, babe. Cheese.
Good job.
Look right here, babe.
Everybody's getting quiet. Yeah. Actually, I'm kind of surprised that it's just 11 o'clock now. I thought we were going to be late today. But I think we're actually supposed to start at 11 and go to about 11:45. So I guess we're sitting pretty good. Glad to have y'all here. I guess there probably are several families that are looking forward to taking advantage of the week. The kids will be out of school next week and out of town and going places and doing things. I guess when you get to be empty nesters, you don't take advantage of that quite as often. We were fortunate yesterday to have Hannah come over and bring our granddaughter to our house for a little while, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So we didn't have to go anywhere. I would like to go see my son. I don't get to see them quite as often. Of course, they're over in Birmingham area. But we're going to jump into our material. We started, I actually got getting into the text on the study of Ecclesiastes last week in chapter 1. And I guess true to my form, I didn't get through the first chapter, like I wanted to. But we got pretty close, only like about 3 verses. So we're going to pick up there just to kind of go back and maybe recap a few things from chapter 1 as Solomon, or Koheleth, as he refers to himself, being the preacher, the speaker, the assembly gatherer and addresser. He talks about all the vanity that this life has to offer under the sun, S-U-N. And he starts out giving us a couple of examples from nature where, things are just in a constant cycle, and that's kind of relating to our lives also as a human, as a mortal, that, we just get kind of caught up in the rat race of the same old routines over and over and over. And it talked about there not being anything new under the sun, that, everything that happened in the past, it's nothing really new from the standpoint that nothing's going to save us from the end of our lives, which is eventually one day we will pass from this life through death into what lies next. And we got down to the last part of the chapter, which is verses 16 through 18. And we're going to read those, I guess, then we'll pick up and get started in chapter 2. I actually have some takeaway lessons from chapter 1 that we'll spend a little time on too, just highlighting them as we go through. We probably won't spend a lot of time talking about them, but beginning in chapter 1, verse 16, he says, I communed within my heart, saying, look, I obtained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Never turn my clicker on. So in these passages, we can see that the writer here, he's kind of taking an inward look there in verse 16, attesting to his own qualifications again of making this particular journey or quest. In the New King James Version, which I'm reading from, it says he communed within his heart. The New International Version says that he thought to himself, to myself. So he acknowledges having obtained great wisdom, or attaining greatness and wisdom beyond any others before him. His understanding of wisdom and knowledge was great within his heart and mind. We know that people traveled far distances just to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And in fact, in 1 Kings chapter 10, you can read about the story of the Queen of Sheba who came to Solomon to hear his great wisdom. And we're not going to spend time certainly looking at all that, but I do want to point out kind of what the conclusion that she made at the end of her examination of the wisdom of Solomon. That's in 1 Kings 10, 6, picking up verse 6 and 7, I guess. And then she said to the king, it was a true report which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and saw with my own eyes. And indeed, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame of which I heard. So even her, she kind of came to test him, really, to see if, everything that she had heard about Solomon was true. And even herself, being a queen of Sheba, I'm not sure where Sheba was, but she was impressed by what she saw in the courts of Solomon and hearing the wisdom and the wealth that he displayed in his court. Although being so wise and such a great thinker, there is no mention, however, of Solomon's first principle of wisdom as he gives us in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7, that being the fear of the Lord. So, therefore, as a result of that being absent here, we might assume that the wisdom or method of solving this quest is really just the best thinking that man can do in and of himself, apart from God or without God. It's his own thinking. Yet even under this type of a serious approach, it still provided no answer to the misgivings of life. So we see in the next verse that he turns his attention to an understanding of madness and folly. He says, not only was his heart set to understand wisdom, but also madness and folly, with his heart still guiding him with wisdom, we're told. And it was this his own wisdom guiding him, which allowed him to perceive even before he started in this pursuit that it also was going to be grasping for the wind. And this idea of madness and folly is kind of like it's the pleasure. When you think of madness, sometimes think of people that's obsessed with something. They've gone mad about it, or they're just completely obsessed. That's all they can focus on. In this case, I think it's really more focusing on the madness being the frivolities of this life, doing things that are maybe somewhat careless or not necessarily very wise, being foolish. Let's see. Verse 18, we're told that increasing our wisdom and knowledge, unfortunately, also brings an increase of grief and sorrow. And on the more common, or one of the more common or opposite reverse type sayings that we might have a little more prevalent in our society and world today is that of ignorance is bliss. Sometimes I think I've used that. I think it's talking to the kids or talking to different people. Ignorance is bliss sometimes. If you don't know about something, it's kind of like it's not something else to worry about. I think we could probably all come up with things that we could give in an example. I listed a few things. I mean, certainly health concerns is something. But a lot of us, as you get on older in age, you start thinking, if you don't know you've got some particular problem, you're not going to worry about it. And then when you find out you do have some problem, then you start worrying about it. And, so that not having that awareness and that knowledge is kind of blissful. It prevents you from having sorrow and grief about when you worry about it. We live in this high technology world where, something can happen all the way around the world, and we can know about it in a minute. As soon as you turn on the internet, or you pull up your phone, or if what kind of live feeds you have, you may get it text right to you. But I also thought about, not too long ago, I guess it's been a couple of years now, I went outside in the garage, was going to get something out of the freezer out there, and when I opened it, I knew there was something wrong. Everything's kind of dripping and not icy cold like it was or should have been. This is a real old freezer anyway. But I didn't know it was broken. I didn't know it was having problems. But when I found out, then I started having to worry about it. We encounter those types of things all the time as we go through life. You don't know something has an issue until you run across it, and then something else to worry about and deal with. So certainly, a certain awareness creates more concern and sorrow. And there's actually some biblical examples about this. I think one of the more prevalent ones is the fact of Christ's sorrow in the Garden of Gethsemane before his crucifixion. He went. I'm not going to turn and read these passages. I've got a lot to cover today, but he prayed 3 times to the Father that he would remove that cup from him, and was very sorrowful. And even in Luke, it talks about those sweat drops that came from his brow being like those drops of blood. But he knew what was going to happen to him. Peter, James, and John, who were sleeping, a short distance away, they weren't concerned about it that much. They were glad to have a little bit of rest, I guess. And but Christ knew. And then there was another example. I don't have this one on the slide, but I wanted to flip over to Acts chapter 20. This is an example from the life of Paul that came to my mind that I wanted to mention. It's when he was in Ephesus, working there with the elders at the church. And in Acts chapter 20 and verse 25, and then we'll look at verses 36 and 38. So in verse 25, he says, and indeed now I know that you all, among whom I have gone preaching the kingdom of God, will see my face no more. Therefore I testify to you this day that I am innocent of the blood of all men. So Paul's, giving them his closing statements. He tells them they're not going to see his face anymore. He's talking to the elders of the church at Ephesus. Then verse 36, it said, when he had said all these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all. Then they all wept freely and fell on Paul's neck and kissed him, sorrowing most of all for the words which he spoke, that they would see his face no more. And they accompanied to the ship. So here in this biblical example, we see the elders there in Ephesus, how that knowledge and awareness that they were never going to be able to see Paul again brought great sorrow, even more sorrow to their parting. So some of the... I may have hit the wrong button. I don't know what I hit. Oh, good. I don't know where I went to black. All right, so here are some of the takeaways that we want to look at real quick from lesson 1 or chapter 1. First thing, everything is meaningless without Him, capital H. And then a man receives no gain for his labor when it is for selfish ends. Lesson number 3, there's nothing new under the sun, but coming to know the S-O-N, Son, makes us a new creation in Christ. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. Number 4, though man does not remember us, God never forgets. For 2 Corinthians 5:10 tells us we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that we may receive the things done in the body according to what He has done, whether good or evil, or good or bad. And then lastly, there's one lesson that life is one gigantic frustration filled with futility without a relationship to Jesus Christ. So that's kind of the end of chapter 1. As we move over to chapter 2, we're going to look at the first 3 verses, which talk about the vanity of pleasure. Reading in verse 1, it says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. But surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. These first 3 verses summarize the whole of chapter 2's first 11 verses, and the search for meaning actually begins with that of seeking mirth. I had to look up, mirth is not a word that I'm familiar with. You may be a little more familiar with it, but the actual definition of mirth is gladness or gaiety accompanied with laughter. But basically it's talking about pleasure, and depending on what version you have, it may actually use the word pleasure there in your version. But irregardless, it also proves to be meaningless and vanity in the quest. He tells us, he comes to the conclusion that laughter is madness and foolishness. And there's an apparent disappointment that mirth or pleasure accomplishes anything based on the question that he poses to us in the same verse. He says, what does it accomplish? So what does pleasure, gaiety, laughter, what does it accomplish? I think, I enjoy having a good time and having fun. I think we all get some benefit out of it. But Ron, you got something you want to say?
going to experiment with these different things of life so that he can see the results and he can reveal to us the wisdom he gained from it.
Right. And that's exactly right. That's a good point to make out, that Solomon's on this quest using the wisdom that God gave him to actually search out all the pleasures and follies and things in life to see how satisfying and gratifying they are. I mean, that's the whole point of this is, to try to answer the question, what profit has man from all of his labors, all his actions, all his things that he does in this world? What's the meaning of it? What's the gratification can you get from it? And that's kind of the whole. That's what's driving this whole book, I guess, and the writing of it. And we talked about how Solomon, with all the resources he had, and he'll mention it several times as we go through that. Nobody could make this journey to find out. What is the most meaningful and thing you want to get out of life? What do you want to get out of life? What's going to make it all worth its while, so to speak? So anyway, moving on in verse 3, he experiments with wine, with folly. He mentions that here, that this is something he looked at. And this is a literal wine, intoxicating drink. It says, all right, I've written down here, the word wine is literal wine, but can also figuratively stand for all the pleasure-giving luxuries of life. So you could look, you think about, celebrating life and wine. A lot of people enjoy drinking wine with their meals and their dinners at night. And a lot of times when you look at people on TV or something, you see how that accompanies, the lifestyle of the luxurious, the fame and fortune of those who are rich. But folly in this particular passage refers more to parties, frivolity, and self-indulgence. But in all this examination and searching, though, Solomon does tell us that he still guided his heart with wisdom. And that means that he didn't give himself over to total dissipation. He never lost self-control or became an addict. Even pleasures pursued in moderation will not bring happiness or satisfaction. All right, so any other comments along the lines of those items?
Back in the 90s, one of my vendors gave me some tickets to baseball because the Braves was really hot.
Sure.
Wednesday night, I went to the ball game. The next Sunday, there was a little 10 or 11-year-old boy. He said, Mr. Ptccoc, he said, were you sick, Lindsay? Because he was used to all this in.
Right. Yeah, it's like a stake being driven in your heart. So Brother Cagle was sharing with us, when he was younger, he got tickets to a Braves game on a Wednesday night and went. And, when he came back, I guess Sunday or later, this young boy came up and asked him if he was sick and where he was that night. So there's a lot of things in this world to, pull us away, distract us from God and from seeking maybe what's more really important in this life. So, anybody else? This next section, I'm kind of lost my place on this page. It's pretty fine print. I better move my little white thing down here where I can see a little better. But I remember. Here I am. All right, so we're moving to. I wanted to share with you a few passages that just talks about this. The first one is, I guess, Proverbs 21:7. It says, "He who loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich." There's a passage over in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 6, where Paul, in writing to the young preacher Timothy, is telling him about taking care of the widows. And I was planning on flipping over there and reading that one. I think I got a mark on it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, it said that... But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. And then Luke chapter 8, verse 14. This is in the parable of the sower. Sower went out to sow all the seed. And that which fell among the thorns is compared to being one which fell among, well, it's one where it's being compared to where the pleasures of life choked out the word. So the word didn't become fruitful and didn't grow to maturity and produce fruit. And it was these pleasures of life which impacted that in that particular story of Christ from Luke chapter 8. So that's the first three verses. Let's just move on to the next section. This is verses 4 through 11. Just kind of talk more about possessions. And I'll just read these since if there is anyone at home watching, they can hear a little bit easier. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. And I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor. For this was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled. And indeed, all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. So, in this particular section, he's talking about the things that he accomplished, the things that he pursued, as far as from a physical standpoint here in life. We can see that kind of summarizing some of this. In his quest for pleasure, Solomon built houses, planted vineyards, and made gardens and orchards of all kinds of fruit trees. He made pools with which to water them. He acquired male and female servants and herds and flocks beyond any predecessor. He gathered to himself silver and gold and special treasures that only kings and rulers could acquire. He also acquired male and female singers and musical instruments of all kinds. There was nothing withheld from his longing heart and gazing eyes. Yet, reflecting back on all the acquisitions and accomplishments from his labors, he sums it up and says it was all vanity and grasping for the wind. I do want to point out in verse 8, depending on what version you're reading from, there's various translations of this particular verse. It actually could be referring to a harem of women. Verse 8, the word that's used here and translated as the musical instruments is also translated in the English Standard Version and the Revised Standard Version as concubines. The same word was found in some ancient Near Eastern texts within the context of obtaining women. This was in a document that was historically found. It was between the Egyptian pharaoh Amenophis III to some prince of Gezer, whoever that is. But in the context, he was talking about obtaining 40 concubines. I remember that was part of the actual context of the letter. So that was actually found in this word, and the word is something like abidi or something like that in the Hebrew. And I'm using this book. This is a book I got actually out of our church library that I found on Ecclesiastes. It's written by Derek Kidner. And I may have mentioned it previously, but I've been using it, and that was one of the footnotes that he had in this that I found was interesting. So, depending on what version you have, that may be what you read in your version. But that would obviously it would correlate more with the historical facts that we have recorded in the Bible, of course, with Solomon. In 1 Kings chapter 11, we're told that he loved many foreign women. That he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and unfortunately, it was his wives who, in the latter part of his life, turned his heart away from God. Yep, it turned out to be his downfall. The Revised Standard Version actually reads, I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, men's delight. The New International Version says, a harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. So I think that would probably fit in the context of what he's trying to say there better than instruments of music, personally. You can form your own opinion, I guess. But anyway, moving on to verse 9, we see that he was greater than any before, yet he says that he still kept his wisdom. Nothing that his eyes saw or desired did he neglect to indulge in. And, how often do we go, as we go through life, we see something and we want it, and a lot of times we put some effort into obtaining it if we want it bad enough. I kind of do the same thing. I don't always do that. I think I see a lot of things that I want more often than I acquire. I think we have to deny ourselves somewhat in this life to please God, and there's actually some verses that we could look at to support that. Solomon, he didn't deny himself of anything on this quest, anything that he saw or anything that his heart desired. Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, Christ himself tells us, if we're going to seek him, we need to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. We have to somehow or another suppress those desires of this life that we come in contact with to really please God the way that we should. He said his heart's delight was his reward, and whatever his eyes and his heart desired was obtained. We might think surely that there was some satisfaction and profit from obtaining these things, but even at the end of his quest with his resources, he says it was still all vanity and chasing for the wind. Yes, Ron. Right? Mm-mm.
Say the two best days of owning a boat, an airplane, the day you buy it, buy one the day you sell it. It's kind of like what you're saying. It's not
Yep.
having all those things, having wealth and money and all that is not necessarily folly.
Mm-mm.
It's used for the glory of God. It's used to benefit others. Are we good stewards of what we've been given?
Certainly. So we've had a couple of comments. Ron pointed out, you give an example of, somebody, you see a boat you want, you buy it, but then after you've had it for a while, you start sinking all your money into it, and it's always having trouble. You find that it comes to be more of a burden than it should be. And then Jeff also added on, it's kind of more of a perspective of what we do with the wealth that God gives us, how we use it. Whether do we use it to satisfy selfish desires, or do we use it to help others and promote God's kingdom and do things to help it? And that is the point of the book. I mean, it's all a matter of perspective, what we do with what God has given us. Verse 11 there tells us it was all vanity. Yeah. But there is a definite connection between our treasures and the desires of our hearts. We spend much of our time and money on things that we're interested in and want to do or experience. There's a few examples I'll point up. First off, Christ himself in Matthew chapter 6 told us not, on the Sermon on the Mount, he tells us there not to lay up treasures upon the earth, but rather to lay up treasures in heaven. In 1 John chapter 2, he told us not to love not the world, neither the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, or the pride of life. And then in Luke chapter 12, the parable of the rich fool, we can see in that particular story that, he had obtained great riches and was planning to tear down his barns, build bigger ones so he could keep acquiring more. And God had other plans in his life, and he didn't know that his soul was going to be required of him that night, and then it was going to all go to be somebody else's. So it's very important that we learn to use the things that God does give us to His glory, and to be good stewards of those, as was pointed out earlier. All right, so let's look at verses 12 through 17 as we move on. Then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Or only what he has already done. Then I saw that wisdom exceeds folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceive that the same event happens to them all. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As the fool. So in this particular section, the quest for knowledge is a source of frustration and pain because it is futile. No human mind can solve the mysteries of life. Wisdom certainly has its practical value, but it is subject to limitations. The advantages it offers are only temporary from a worldly standpoint. And here in verse 12, we see that Solomon compared wisdom, madness, and folly to see if there was any real value in any one way of living over another. And he goes on to point out in that endeavor that, the king's successor. What more could he do? So he's talking about going back again, looking at the qualifications he had, the resources that he had, all the money, all the influence, all the time. Him having been, pretty much having a very peaceful kingdom. His abilities and qualifications allowed him to make this pursuit better than anybody else. No one coming after him, could do this better than himself. In verse 13, we see he compared wisdom and folly, and saw how the wisdom excels folly, and light versus darkness, and how that light is much better than darkness. He says, the preacher did not deny that wisdom is a good thing. The fool falls into all kinds of various troubles because of the poor decisions he makes. This refers to the kind of practical wisdom and folly that Proverbs describes. The book of Proverbs, of course. There are numerous proverbs which state how much better wisdom and wise actions contrast against those of folly or foolishness. The fool may be lazy, quarrelsome, a poor money handler, or fall into promiscuity. All these things can bring about ruin. Wisdom does excel folly just as light exceeds and excels darkness. Acting in a wise manner always brings better results and more gain. In chapter 6, and there on the Sermon on the Mount, I think I had that marked. So I find it pretty quick. So chapter 6, verses 22 and 23, this is Jesus talking. He gives us some instruction along this line, referring to the lamp of the body. It says, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So I don't think I needed to read 24, but it just kind of follows in, I guess, if there's the end of that one. But another example from Scripture is in John chapter 3, where this is actually Jesus speaking on this occasion. Chapter 3, 18. I think I put a little marker there for that so I can find it without too much trouble. 18 through, 21? He said, this is Jesus speaking. He says, he who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. So here's a couple of examples that point out the benefits and from an eternal standpoint of light over darkness. Any other comment? Any other comment? There's a lot of verses that we could look at, of course, comparing the benefits of light over darkness. Sometimes how little light it takes to dispel darkness. Not supposed to hide our light. Don't put a bushel over it. Let it shine. Hebrew actually we're told, let your light shine, and men may see your good works. That's right. Verse 14, he points out, though, that the wise and the fool, they both have the same fate. The fool walks in darkness, but not even wisdom can do anything to save a person from death, the greatest calamity of all. One person may be prudent and another foolish, but the same event happens to them all. And then in verse 15, he gives another inward look. What gain is there from being wise? And starts questioning even that. Koheleth here ponders whether in his own heart and mind whether there's any real gain or benefit from even being wise. But certainly there is, especially when that wisdom is the wisdom of God and you apply it in your lives and the way you treat others, the way you live and act and use the things that God has given to us. Verse 16 tells us that the wise cannot even count on having a legacy or any remembrance which outlasts that of the fool. They will both eventually be forgotten and both will die just the same. And then the final conclusion in that section, he says that this realization results in a troubling state of mind, even to the point of hating life because of the distressing or grievous work and vanity of it all in the end. And it refers to it again as grasping for the wind. The next few verses 18 through 23. I may move it. Yeah, it was just a little slow. 18 through 23. Let's flip back over and we'll read it and keep moving. I don't want to get too far behind. Took my marker out. All right, so he says, "Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart in despair of all the labor of which I had toiled under the sun, for there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what has a man from all his labor and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful and his work burdensome. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity." I'd actually kind of thought I just wouldn't read this and just go through the points, but it kind of helps, I think, for us to kind of read it real quick. These last three verses... In this section of Ecclesiastes, he returns to the subject of wealth and pleasure, but unlike the previous section, in which focused on the impossibility of finding satisfaction in pursuing pleasure and riches, these particular verses focus on the absurdity of one devoting his life to obtaining wealth only to leave it behind to someone else. The vanity of it all is having wisely worked ceaselessly and sorrowfully all the days of our lives, we then end up leaving it to another who has not labored for it, or perhaps not even had the wisdom or the skills to have acquired it in and of themselves. All right, the example of Disneyland. And that is a valid point in today's society. You know, so many people, even our country. I know, you know, Chris did an excellent job this morning in his lesson, you know, talking about something along that line where, you know, not following God, not keeping in line with His teachings and His morality. Ron was sharing with us the example of Disney World, how it, you know, back when they were first originated, they were so wholesome in their movies, their stories, everything that they came out with. But over time, just like our society as a whole, it's kind of fallen away. I was trying to remember what it was the Canaanites. He was talking about the morality of the Canaanites and why God utterly wiped them off the earth. If you go back and remember anything about, go back and look at the early readings that we have of Canaan, who he was and what he did. And, you know, I think homosexuality, and that's one of the things that, of course, we know in the church, and if you read the Bible, that's one of the things that God really detests and hates. And that seemed to be part of his life. That's creeping into Disney now, being promoted. And even in our society today, we see it. You know, if we don't get that turned around in our world, in our country, you know, God's going to one day uproot us. And we can count that for sure. It happened to the Roman Empire. You know, they crumbled from within because of morality. And there's a lot of other nations around who would like to see us fall. So, you know, but it starts with me and it starts with you. I guess trying to do what we can to change that direction. Here in these passages, you know, he's telling us though you can't take it with you. You're going to end up leaving it to somebody else, and whether that person will be wise or not. That's kind of despairing. You don't know. Sometimes, hopefully, we can leave it to our children. You know, but that's, you know, I'm sure the desire of us all is that we have children. But sometimes in life, you know, we get thrown over. You have something happen, and maybe your children have something happen to them, and they've already passed from this life before you. Then whose does it go to? You know, there's all kinds of disappointments and things in this life that we have to deal with. But verses 20 through 21, the preacher despairs of having to leave all of one's accomplishments to another who hasn't worked for it themselves. The laborer's wisdom, knowledge, and skills acquired for completing the job should have to be earned. In fact, 2 Thessalonians 3:10 tells us that if man will not work, neither should he eat. And we kind of have that mentality in our own lives, you know, that, you know, people should have to kind of earn what they are given. You know, they should be, what we receive, we should be due receiving it. When somebody just gets something, you know, handed to them, you know, it doesn't quite seem fair. So we kind of have that in our hearts and our minds, even though we may not always express it. Verses 22 and 23, what does one get for his work and labor under the sun? Days full of grief, sorrow, and burdensome work, and anxiety with no rest at night. Vanity again. Those who amass a great amount of wealth and riches tend to worry more about thieves and loss. Robbers are more prone to target the rich. Thus, the rich must be more concerned with others breaking and entering to steal the valuables that they have. So they have to take greater precautions to prevent it and stop it. So there's a trade-off either way you go. Our time is getting away. I've got just a few more things. I guess I could wait and pick that up next week and probably make everybody happy rather than keeping you later than I should. So I'll drive a peg down there. Maybe, I think this chapter 4 is going to be pretty slow, and I don't have too awful much on chapter 3, believe it or not yet. But I got another whole week to add stuff to it, so who knows what I'll do. But thank you for your comments and your attention today, and I'll just put a note there, and we'll pick up at the end of chapter 2 next week.